Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome back to the Independent Census Scientific Advisory Committee. Welcome to I-CSAC members. Welcome to those of you watching us on YouTube. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the Census Quality Reinforcement Task Force, Allison Flyer, Dorian Call, and Taylor Sable, who are supporting our work. Thank you. To get us started, I've invited Dr. Connie Citro to provide a few remarks that set the stage for us. Dr. Citro is Senior Scholar with the Committee on National Statistics at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. She has been instrumental in CNSTAT's principles and practices and in the ASA project on assessing and monitoring the health of federal statistics. She is exactly the right person to talk to us about the importance of high-quality data for a well-functioning democracy. Dr. Citro.
Well, thank you so much, Barbara, for inviting me to open the second meeting of the Independent Census Scientific Advisory Committee, and great that I-CSAC works as an acronym there. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. The items that are on your agenda, the Population Estimates Program and race and ethnicity in the census and surveys, could not be more central to the American polity, society, and economy. The POP estimates, as they are known, are second only to the census in their impact in allocating billions of dollars of federal funds, providing denominators for birth, death, and other rates, making population surveys more accurate, and in so many state, local, federal government, you name it, planning, projections, just so many ways. Race and ethnicity data have been an essential and fraught aspect of census taking from the get-go, with many changes over time. Both the estimates and race ethnicity data today face challenging measurement issues, which I'm glad to see that you will be considering. Reflecting more broadly on the role of federal statistics, as I'm sure you know, the U.S. led the way in basing the peaceful allocation of political power on a scientific statistical undertaking, namely the decennial census of population, which quickly acquired multiple use cases as Congress expanded content. The U.S., over its history, established many new statistical programs as policy issues rose to the federal level, beginning with statistics on trade, agriculture, education, and labor in the 19th century, and adding statistics on income, Social Security, science and engineering, health, energy, justice, and transportation in the 20th century. Statistics from the census, the population estimates, and the myriad other federal statistical programs are vital for a functioning democracy in which households, businesses, government agencies, NGOs, the media, financial markets, academia, everyone can make their own evidence-based decisions and hold government officials accountable. To serve that function, federal statistics must meet the highest standards of relevance, accuracy, and objectivity, and they must be protected against such non-statistical uses as enforcement or administrative actions affecting individuals. Numerous documents attest to these requirements, including the CenStat Principles and Practices for a Federal Statistical Agency and Title III of the 2018 Evidence Act, which incorporates the fundamental responsibilities of federal statistical agencies from Statistical Policy Directive Number 1. It is no coincidence that the UN Fundamental Principles of Official Statistics originated in work by the Conference of European Statisticians around 1990, recognizing that the newly established nations of the former Soviet Union required appropriate and reliable objective data that adhered to professional and scientific standards to support functioning democracies and market-oriented economies. I want to acknowledge the expertise, professionalism, integrity, and devotion of the staff of the Census Bureau and other federal statistical agencies who are accomplishing so much today under incredibly difficult circumstances. The country is in their debt. I also want to acknowledge the vital role of I-CSAC and other organizations, such as the Federal State Cooperative Population Estimates Program, in continuing a long-standing tradition of informed outside methodological advice to improve data quality. Such advice is a critical part of any and every scientific enterprise. You have to have folks outside kicking the tires. A motivation for founding the American Statistical Association in 1839 in Boston, in fact, was concern about, and I quote the founding members, what they called the antiquated and ineffective machinery to be used in the 1840 census with little change since 1790. Now, there wasn't any time to do anything about the 1840 census, but in 1849, ASA and the newly formed American Geographical Society were invited to consult with a special census board, and the result was a series of sweeping changes and improvements for the 1850 census. The first continuing formal advisory committee to the Census Bureau, the ancestor to CSAC and I-CSAC, was appointed in 1918 from ASA and American Economic Association membership. So many thanks to the I-CSAC members for continuing to meet. I hope that in the not too distant future, I-CSAC and other advisory groups will be restored to formal roles in support of the best statistics possible for our nation. I thank you again for asking me to open your session, and I look forward to what I know will be a careful, instructive, and thorough review of the topics on your agenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Citro. I really am inspired by your remarks, feel renewed in our mission, and was really happy to hear some of this history with which I was not already familiar. So thank you very much. At this point, I want to turn to my own remarks and sort of pick up on a question that Dr. Citro posed. Why is I-CSAC doing this work? Why are we continuing to meet? Well, census data still determines congressional representation. It still directs billions in federal funding to schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. It still shapes where businesses invest and how communities plan their futures. But something has changed. Its mechanisms for scientific feedback have been mostly dismantled. All Census Bureau advisory committees were terminated earlier last year, including this one. And experts for the Census Bureau have not been attending general scientific conferences, such as the American Statistical Association, with rare exception. Let me explain why this matters for those watching online. Conferences are where scholars test ideas in public, as Dr. Citro was saying, where the tires get kicked. When you present a paper at a conference, you get feedback before submitting it to a journal. Audience questions surface weaknesses that you hadn't considered. They point to alternative perspectives and alternative explanations, and they suggest new data sources that can significantly improve your work. Advisory committees serve a similar essential function. They provide an expert review. These experts catch methodological problems early. They validate sound approaches and challenge others. The difference between advisory committees and professional conferences is that federal advisory committees consist of a small group of experts, carefully selected for their high-level of expertise. Now, the Census Bureau needs this outside expertise, just as Dr. Citro said, if they are to keep advancing the science of accurately counting the population and producing the essential statistics that drive our economy and our democracy. Without conferences and without advisory committees, Census Bureau scientists are working largely in isolation, cut off from the peer review and constructive critique that makes good science even better. This is why I-CSAC matters. This is why our work has impact. We provide the scientific feedback loop that has been largely eliminated elsewhere. We bring decades of combined expertise to bear on Census Bureau methods and innovations. We ask the hard questions that conference audiences would ask. We offer the independent review that strengthens the Census Bureau's work. And we are not alone. For a while, we were the only former federal advisory group reconstituting independently to continue their work. But a few weeks ago, the American Medical Association and the Vaccine Integrity Project at the University of Minnesota announced that they were creating an independent system to review scientific evidence on vaccines. This matters. It signals that the scientific community recognizes a responsibility. When federal structures disappear, the need for rigorous, independent scientific advice does not. Here's hoping that other groups will form to provide the scientific advice that federal agencies need, because science doesn't stop serving the public good just because institutional structures change. Before we turn to today's agenda, I need to address a development that emerged after we finalized our meeting agenda, and that is the revision to the 2026 operational test in support of the 2030 census. This test was designed to be a foundational part of the science needed to inform the 2030 census. It was supposed to rigorously evaluate innovations that could reduce persistent undercounts while increasing efficiencies. Instead, the revised plan eliminates critical components, such as testing group quarters administration. It also eliminates sites in Western Texas, Arizona, and Western North Carolina, locations specifically chosen to address persistent undercounts in rural areas and tribal lands with limited internet and mail connectivity. The revised test also introduces new elements that have the potential of undermining its validity. First, it proposes using the American Community Survey questionnaire instead of the decennial census questionnaire. The ACS has a much higher respondent burden, and that matters for trying to estimate response. Second, it proposes English-only internet self-response, and this will lower self-response rates and drive up field costs, the opposite of what a test should achieve. Third, it proposes another test of USPS letter carriers as enumerators. This idea was already tested in 2011 and 2018. The Bureau has not articulated what new research questions they will be testing this time around. A test reduced in scope, lacking in clear hypotheses, and reduced in methodological rigor cannot provide the valid evidence to inform the 2030 census. This is not a technical disagreement. This is about whether we build the 2030 census on a foundation of evidence or guesswork. Many scientists have spoken out about this, and in my opinion, the I-CSAC should too. We could not include the issue in today's agenda, however, because it emerged just last month, after we had already begun work on the 3 topics you'll hear about today. But as chair, I'm exerting my prerogative to introduce an additional recommendation. And here's the recommendation, and I'll switch in a moment. I-CSAC recommends that the Bureau reconsider the revisions made to the 2026 operational test in support of the 2030 census, specifically to test innovations that, if successful, would improve data quality, and to reinstate test sites in Texas, Arizona, and Western North Carolina that were selected to address persistent undercounts. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I hope, is share my screen. Oh dear. I think it's no. Apologies. I had it all pulled up and I don't see it. Let's see. No, that looks like an email. Okay. There it is. Thank you, Taylor. That's great. See, this is the help that the Census Quality Reinforcement Task Force has been providing all along. So if you could scroll to the bottom of that page, please. There it is. Just a little bit further scrolling. There it is. Okay, so there is a statement of what I just read. And what I would like to propose is that we consider this recommendation. I want to open the floor to comment, to revision, and then at the end, I'd like to have a vote to see if you're in favor of us including this in our recommendations. Any comments? Well, I hope what that means is that you're all in favor of it. So can we see a show of hands on the screen for those who are in favor of it? Okay, great. That looks unanimous to me. Perfect. Thank you. All right, moving along. I want to talk about today's agenda. We're focusing on 3 topics, all available on our website at censusscientific.org. Vintage population estimate, methodology and assessment of new approaches, administrative records coverage by race and ethnicity, and the Race Ethnicity Coding Improvement Project. These were selected from a larger list generated from suggestions of I-CSAC members and also from you, the larger community that was submitted on our website and censusscientific.org. All of the potential topics reflect interests of the Census Bureau. How do we know this? It's because they've posted recent webinars and white papers and other reports. So we're taking these written documents and also the webinars as material for us to comment on in the way that we used to have them present to us in the original CSAC meetings. So the list was longer than 3, of course, and we narrowed it based on the expertise of I-CSAC members' willingness to serve as discussants, and also the constraints of a 3-hour meeting. We'll follow the same efficient structure from our first meeting. We'll cover one topic at a time, starting with the discussant's presentation, then considering each recommendation and making any needed revisions, and ending with a vote. Each topic has 40 minutes allocated for discussion and finalization of recommendations. At 3:05 Eastern Daylight Time, we'll pause for public comments. We'll have a break at 3:55 Eastern Daylight Time for 10 minutes. We aim to adjourn by 5 o'clock. The Census Bureau materials on these topics are available on our website, and our recommendations will be public, transparent, and grounded in the best scientific evidence we can provide. Thank you, I-CSAC members, for continuing to serve your country in this important work. So now let's begin with some brief introductions. Can we have the gallery view again? We can take down the agenda. Thank you. When I call on you, please share your name, institution, and area of expertise. We need to keep this really brief given time, and I'll demonstrate. I'm Barbara Entwistle from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm a social demographer who specializes in migration, population environment relations, and research methods. Okay, I'm going to go in the order I see you on my screen. So Sarah, you're up next.
Hi, Sarah Curran. Thank you, Barbara. University of Washington. I am also a social demographer. I am an expert in migration and gender and population and environment questions.
Thank you. Chris.
Chris Moore at Child Trends, and I work on issues around research in children and youth.
Thank you. Alex.
Aloha, everyone. I'm Alex Ortega. I'm at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I'm an epidemiologist, a public health researcher, and I focus on Latino populations and healthcare equity.
Thank you. John.
I'm John Chaika. I'm currently an independent consultant. I have expertise in administrative records, survey data, income data.
Thank you. Lance.
I'm Lance Waller, a professor in the Department of Biostatistics and Bioinformatics in the Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University, and my expertise is in geography, spatial analysis, and small area estimation.
Thank you. Ron.
Hi, I'm Ron Pivot. I'm with Demographic Analytic Advisors. My area of specialization is demography, small area population estimates and projections, and especially background in administrative records. Thank you.
Thank you. Bonnie.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Sweenor. I'm at Johns Hopkins University. I'm an epidemiologist by training, and my area of expertise is disability data, measurement, and health equity.
Thank you. Salima.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Salima LaForest, and I'm a senior research scientist at the Georgia Institute of Technology. I always go after Bonnie. I know this because I also work in the area of disability, focusing on disability populations with a specific emphasis on employment outcomes.
Thank you. Rogelio.
Hi, I'm Rogelio Sainz. I'm professor in the Department of Sociology and Demography at University of Texas at San Antonio. And my work is in demography, race, Latinos, immigration, health and aging, and public policy.
Thank you. Deborah.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Deborah Balk. I'm the director of the CUNY Institute for Demographic Research at the City University of New York and at Baruch College, one of the CUNY campuses. I am a spatial demographer with emphasis on interactions between population and the environment and a whole host of other social factors. And my specialty is in part data integration across very disparate types of data sets.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for devoting time to this effort because we've all benefited from it. I should mention there are a few members of our committee who were not able to be with us today because of schedule conflicts and the like. So you will see their names on as contributors to some of the presentations, although they're not here today. Okay, so we're ready to go ahead with the meat of the meeting, so to speak. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sarah Curran, who's serving as discussant for Vintage Population Estimate Methodology, Assessment of New Approaches.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm joined by, as you can see, 4 other great colleagues on this committee we worked really hard together, and look forward to them chiming in at the end of during our discussion. I'm going to quickly run through this. Our original title focused on migration, new approaches to estimating migration. But as we dug into it, we realized that there were several new approaches adopted in the last five years. And we wanted to make sure we paid attention to those and addressed them because they also have cascading effects on how we understand estimate migration in estimating populations. So may I have the next slide, please? I'm going to give you, thank you. I'm going to give you a little bit of background to the audience. Vintage population estimates are generated by the Population Estimates Program, and they are called vintage because they refer to the most recent, the latest year of the census, the most recent decennial census, and then they extend through the vintage year, which represents the latest year of estimates available. The purpose of the vintage population estimates is to provide an annualized population count along with selected characteristics. The value of these vintage population estimates is to provide a much closer approximation of the population count for each post-census year, rather than, say, relying on forecasting models, which might be based on, which are based on assumptions about fertility, mortality, and migration change. Instead, we're trying to draw an estimate based on observed empirical data. Next slide, please. So the importance of these vintage estimates is invaluable, essential and crucial. They provide essential data for federal, state, and local agencies, and we provide some examples of that, including allocating agency resources, basis for annual IRS state bonding authority, et cetera, and determining how many clerks the Senate can hire, which affects agency-based legislation capacities for legislating in those areas. They're also used for weights in critical demographic and socioeconomic surveys. And finally, they're invaluable information for census planning, implementation, and quality assessment. Next slide. There are a number of ways in which pieces of information are brought to bear, sourced, and provide insight for estimating the population estimate. First, you typically begin with an estimates base, which is the starting point for each vintage of the population. Then there's a use of vital records to examine births and deaths. Then there are several sources of information that inform net domestic migration and net international migration, which then generates a population estimate. This vintage approach has been used since 1970. And as I said earlier, it refers to the vintage term refers to the release of data for the latest available reference period. Importantly, in 1990, the census adopted the modified age and race census file, which was a reflection of 1990 poor estimation, a 4% loss of information about race categories. And this file was used to address that shortcoming and distribute age and race across all of the estimates that contribute to the population estimate. We have a few links here for you to review some of this background methodology. Next slide, please. The important thing to know is that the vintage approach is a top-down approach with some feedback loops. What we have shown here is how when it begins and where it begins, and then how it works through to generating by the end of June, early July, the national, state, county, metropolitan, and micropolitan statistical population by age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin. Next slide, please. So there have been some recent changes to the based estimate approach since 2020. One of the main reasons for some of these changes, it resulted from COVID, where there was very marked observation of age heaping, an undercount of children, and an undercount of other subpopulations. So in 2022, the Census Population Estimates Program adopted a blended base, which they applied for 2020, 21, and 22. Which involved using information from other sources as well as the census count to distribute information about age, sex, and race using the ACS and what I mentioned earlier, the modified age race census file. In 2025, that blended approach was replaced entirely with the modified age and race census base, which included county level data for children under 10. Next slide. Now, there have also been some changes to the vital statistics estimate since 2024. Prior approaches included a combination of information from the Federal State Cooperative for Population Estimates, FSCPE, and data from the NCHS. There were some challenges with this approach, and timeliness and completeness were a challenge. In 2024, the Census, the PEP program, phased in sole dependence on NCHS provisional data. And then in 2025, the only source for vital statistics is now the NCHS data. And for each vintage, births are adjusted using the base population, using Mark B, which is the modified age race census base for the race distributions. Next slide. Now, there have also been changes to how net international migration components have been estimated, and I'm going to give you updates on how those were done for non-US born immigration, or those coming into the country, non-US born emigration, those leaving, and the net US born migration. This is a slide from the US Census most recent report in January 2026. Okay, next slide. So in prior approaches in prior years, the census used ACS data to apply those current estimates with using the question about residents 1 year ago, or the ROYA method. In 2024, some adjustments were made to the ROYA method using federal administrative data, including information about lawful permanent residents, visa issuances, international student enrollees, and incorporation of humanitarian refugee admissions border releases. This approach was useful and helpful for getting a closer estimate. But in 2025, they used a different source of information for some of their adjustments, which was to use not only the ACS ROYA question, answers to the ROYA question, but also the Department of Justice immigration review data, which includes information about humanitarian migrant populations, specifically where those refugees have landed in states and counties. Okay, next slide. I want to just show you a couple pictures of what this has looked like. So this was a map of the result of the change of the estimates in 2020, estimation approach in 2024. The bars represent the counts for humanitarian students, temporary migrants, and permanent immigrants in the colors. The dark blue line shows the permanent immigrants. And then the line shows the foreign-born immigration rate unadjusted. And then the dashed line shows the adjusted rate as a result of the new sources of data used in the 2024 estimation technique. And you can see that the adjusted approach more closely mirrors what was seen in the data. Next slide. In 2025, when conducting the non-US born migration estimates, we see that we don't have an image of what that adjusted trend looks like. We have a view of the foreign-born immigration unadjusted, and we can see by 2025 that the unadjusted level is at about the same level as the total counts of the humanitarian migrants for each of the categories. Sorry, humanitarian, student, temporary, and permanent immigrants. We can discuss this later, but just to give you a sense of what these estimates were proving, this approach was proving useful by the time we got to 2025. Okay, next slide. Now, non-US born emigration and net international migrations have also seen changes in approach, and I'm going to highlight a couple of those here. With regards to immigration, the Census Bureau is using now data from Mexico's National Survey of Occupation and Employment, or ENOE. And this is the population in Mexico whose residence 1 year ago was in the US. And then adjustments account for immigration to Central and South American countries as well. It's a fairly rich data source, but it is Mexican. And then they use to estimate net US-born migration, they use the ENOE data to adjust for US-born children now living in Mexico in 2025. Regarding the net international migration approach, the PEP has developed a projection method to account for recent trends instead of holding constant prior net international migration. One of the purposes of this is the recognition that there is a lot more dynamism in the net immigration rates, and instead of attempting to use some constant and holding something constant, trying to model in that dynamism into their approach. Next slide, please. I'm going to now briefly mention a few changes to the domestic migration estimates. These include typically, the way domestic migration estimates were made were based on IRS 1040 tax returns in the 39th week of collecting those data to 39th week of collecting those data in a fiscal year. So that's the meaning of cycle 39. In addition, Medicare enrollment databases also tally up the 65 plus household population and changes in their households and change in group quarters. In 2025, they were only collecting cycle 26 tax returns for the household. That was all that was available to the Census Bureau. Only the 26th week of tax returns, in other words, shorted 13 weeks of filing. So 13 weeks of information were not available for the estimates in 2025. In addition, in 2025, because of disclosure avoidance policies, the Center for Medicare Statistics data arrived late, and that delayed tallies for the 65 plus household population. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick summary slide of what some of these changes have looked like, and the Census Bureau's assessment of what the inferences that they made about the value of these changes. So next slide, please. So I'm just going to quickly go over a few assessments of these changes to the vintage methodology and then turn to our recommendations. First of all, we want to commend the Population Estimates Program and the Census Bureau for their careful attention to methodology for improved quality and timely estimates. In addition, we think that the increased reliance on centralized administrative data and new data sources did improve quality, and that's really to be commended. Relying on a blended base improves the quality of each subsequent vintage, and the Mark B has been particularly useful. Particularly grateful for the transparent approach and effective communication about methodologies provided by the Census Bureau. Especially impressive has been the given the staffing and data shortages and the effort to deliver data on time, which is crucial for all the other reasons I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. The next slide. So some of our concerns are related to the unknowns and some of the some questions we have about unknowns and unclear concerns. First of all, it's not clear the quality and consistency, the unknown quality and consistency of new international migration data sources for the end user, and the continuity of access to new data sources by the Census Bureau, in particular the ENOE Mexican data. We're also unclear to us how the new migration sources capture the aging population, given limited access to CMS data, both domestic and international, important because the 65 plus population will be about 20% of the population in 2045. And it's not yet clear to us that these changes have improved on the child or resolved the child undercount. And we will make a recommendation to the census about trying to address how we understand whether it's been resolved. Next slide. Some other concerns we have are related to broader concerns, which have to do with declining trust in government and surveys. And this matters for the census and vintage estimates. There's some evidence people are not participating in federal programs out of fear, and the ACS response rates are declining and undermining quality. This yields a vicious cycle between deteriorating trust in government and trust in census evidence. The Census Bureau's increasing reliance on surveys and administrative data may undermine coverage and quality of the vintage estimates. And we also know that, the fact that there is an EO for stopping waste, fraud, and abuse, but this was not complied with by the CMS in the provision of Medicare data to the Census Bureau. Next slide. I'm going to run quickly through our recommendations. So we recommend that, so I'm just going to skip this challenges for maintaining high quality vintage estimates. Given what I've said earlier, this is a summary of what I mentioned earlier. Next slide. I-CSAC recommends that the Census Bureau conduct more research on the impact of changes within administrative data, especially regarding inclusion, exclusion, and collection of individual characteristics. We also, I-CSAC recommends the impact, understanding better, more research on the impact of ACS response rates on migration estimates for the whole household, whole person, and item non-response in general, especially regarding the citizenship question, race, and ethnicity. We also recommend more research on subnational distribution process of net migrants and validate that approach. We recommend more research on impact of IRS and Medicare data shortages encountered in 2025. And we recommend research on impact on potential loss of access to critical administrative data used to inform international and domestic migrations. Finally, we recommend research that explores expanded application of IRS 1040 data to assist in measuring international migration and population over 65. Next slide. Our second set of recommendations, I-CSAC recommends that the Bureau conduct additional research on the extent of undercounts in the evaluation of the 2030 census due to non-response rates or errors associated with estimates of emigration. We would like the PEP to develop a methodological process that can separate the contribution of the two preceding factors to migration estimates in particular. And we want the census, I-CSAC recommends the census document how it plans to use vintage estimates for the 2030 census planning, especially with regards to workload planning, non-response follow-up, and post-census quality and coverage assessments. Next slide. I-CSAC recommends that the Bureau invest in more scientific expertise, in particular, as mentioned at the beginning of our overall presentation, support the Census Bureau staff, engagement with external scientific community to remain abreast of current methodological developments, prioritize hiring strategically to expand expertise in administrative data coverage and completeness, and prioritize retention of current staff with expertise in administrative data and coverage and completeness. Our fourth recommendation, I-CSAC recommends ongoing assessments of the differences in vintage and census estimates of undercounted populations, including children over 65 population and immigrants. And I think I am done. within the time you needed. Next slide.
Yeah, thank you very much. It really is terrific, and you were very much in the time allowed, which is hard to do. I want to share my own screen. I think I figured out what was wrong before, and we'll see if this is going to work. Yeah, looks like it will. Okay, so what this is a Google Doc that has the recommendations that Sarah just provided. And so this is the first one, which was recommending that the Census Bureau conduct more research. And these were the topics that she identified. What I'd suggest us doing is talking about this recommendation. Other people from the subcommittee that worked on this are welcome to comment. And any questions or changes that people want to see, this would be the time. And then after, I don't know, 5 minutes or so, I will hold a vote and see if we're ready to, as a committee, approve this recommendation. So first, any comments?
I think Salima would love it if you could zoom in, Barbara.
Oh, sure. Okay, let's see. I will zoom. Okay.
Yeah.
How's that?
Perfect.
The only thing there is that you can't see them all, but that's okay. These are the first ones, and there's another one on the next page. Any comments?
A lot to absorb.
It is a lot to absorb, I know.
This is Andrew Houghtonville. I came late, so I don't know. I didn't hear a lot of the beginning part. I had recently heard a talk about, government distrust for government, non-responses, particularly in rural areas. Do you have any thoughts on that, or is there any evidence of undercounting in rural areas? Just as a general inquiry, not as a change to the recommendations.
I don't know offhand, I don't know the answer to that question. I do think it's an important question. I suppose that could be a modification of to include to include something about rural communities in our
I don't suggest changing the recommendations.
yeah.
It was on forefront of my mind, and nobody else was asking questions, so I figured I'd ask.
I appreciate you asking. I think it's very important, actually. So I appreciate you saying something about it.
So Andrew, just so that you know, there was a recommendation that we already approved about the 2026 test. And part of the focus of that test was undercount in rural areas.
Yeah, that's right.
Any other questions, comments? Are we ready to vote?
I just had a quick question about bullet point number 5, the impact on potential loss of access to critical administrative data. What can you just speak more about that?
Yes, what we were referring to is that the estimate for well, there are two things. One thing is for the international immigration data, they use a Mexican data source. So the question is, will we retain access to that data source? That seems like maybe questionable since they're not governed by our federal data access rules. And the second is that the extent to which, say, for example, CMS continues to comply or not comply with EO orders for sharing data, or IRS data is less available. We have fewer cycle weeks to draw on. Again, these are issues that could affect the quality of the estimates.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Ron, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, on the international side also, there's a number of data sources coming from DHS. And to the extent that DHS maintains a consistent set of their universe and of how they're managing the data, it could have a definite impact. And that was the other part of it. Thank you.
And just to be clear, you meant the Department of Homeland Security, not the Demographic and Health Surveys.
Yes, that is correct.
Just checking. Any other comments? Okay. Are we ready to vote? So all in favor of this first recommendation, can I see a show of hands? Okay, I had my hand up. All right, Alex, do you have your hand up? Maybe he had to step away. I don't know. Okay. I'll ask him later about that. Thanks, Bonnie. Okay, good. So moving along to the second one. This is about, other sorts of things that the Bureau could do. Comments, questions, changes to this one? Oh, 4 participants have raised their hand. Okay. Let's see who's got their hand up. There it is. Okay, Rogelio, why don't you go first since you're the first I saw? You need to unmute.
That might have been his vote that was still.
Yeah, what was it?
Oh, okay, okay. So these were votes that were still happening.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Any comments or questions about this second recommendation from what I think of as the vintage group?
Just for those of you to orient you, because I covered a lot of ground. This is about how the vintage approach, how understanding how the vintage can support and help us understand the 2030 census and some more work on anticipating the role of the vintage estimates for the census.
Are we ready to vote? I'm not. Okay, everybody in favor? Can I see a show of hands? Let's see, Chris. Yeah, there you go. And great. I think that's everybody. Okay, so that one passes unanimously. Okay, here's the third one. Sarah, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Sure. This was our recommendation about the Bureau investing in scientific expertise to support the shifting and pretty dynamic set of challenges around both not only migration estimates, but the need for sustaining and developing the use of administrative data and ensuring its quality contributions for the estimate, and the need for scientific expertise, both collaborations with scientific community and hiring strategically and retaining key expert staff.
Great. Any comments about this? Questions? Changes?
Yeah,
Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
The retaining staff. I also think that I don't know if this is developing succession plans for, this might be too weird, but it's not just to maintain the individuals, but to maintain, to pass that knowledge along, and to, because if you have just maintained the vintage employees, you might lose, and so to develop a program, but that might be too much.
like that addition. I'm sure, you know, since it's federal government, there has to be, you know, the call for employees has to be open. But with regards to perhaps a recommendation around creating a program to preserve institutional knowledge and to train junior staff on these methods would be.
Or maintaining the capacity,
Yeah.
Just, current step, retention of current staff and maintaining capacity for this research.
Okay, so
I like it, adding it to the bullet point, the third bullet point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maintaining this capacity.
It's capacity.
Maintaining, I would also suggest or increasing.
Sure.
Okay. Great. Other thoughts about this one? Okay, are we ready to vote? Everybody in favor of this one as it stands? See a show of hands. Great, so I think we are approving that one. And then there's just this one last one. So Sarah, you wanna?
Okay, yes, since there were such dramatic differences in estimates since 2020 between the vintage and the census, we would recommend, I-CSAC recommends ongoing assessments of the differences in vintage and census estimates of the undercounted populations.
Questions, comments?
Sort of young in front of children, because I don't think it's anywhere near as big a problem with older children. And if you're looking at children as a whole, that could mask the undercount of the young children.
Yes, that sounds like a good addition. I think Chris would agree. Yes.
Yeah.
And we also add the people with disabilities, since they're undercounted as well.
I'm comfortable with that.
Is that so? I just want to circle around to how vintage estimates are used. Selena, I agree in principle.
For disability?
Are vintage estimates used to estimate his disability?
That's a good point. I don't.
Not directly.
No, they're not. It's age, sex, race.
Pretty basic.
This is also, this is not exactly an exhaustive list. It was I mean, we could say, for example, if we wanted. I mean, we know these are not the only potentially undercounted individuals. So we could put.
Yeah. Rather than for example.
Notably, for example.
Especially.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good. Other thoughts about this one? Okay, so can are we ready to approve? Can I see a show of hands of those who approve this one? Yeah, that's great. Good. All right, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate it. Thanks to Ron as well, who was the co-lead of that subcommittee, but also to the others who served on it, Chris and Deborah. Everybody was really important in putting that together. And I personally think that the presentation on the vintage estimates and how they're done is a gift to the field because it was very well done, I thought, and very clear. Andrew, do you have a question? Is that your leftover vote, or is there something?
Yeah, that's my leftover vote. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's all right. I just wanted to give you a chance. Okay, well, happily, we're running a little ahead of schedule. And we have the public comments at 3:05. And I think we have to do that right then. Because of the way this meeting has been set up. But I guess I'll take the opportunity and ask you all whether you think this is something we should try and do again in the fall. I wonder if people have opinions about that. I think it's a service. I know for me personally, I think it's a service that I can provide in a time when it's not always clear what I can do. But it also, many of us have day jobs, and it's quite a bit of work to put these discussant remarks together. And so, I personally think it's worth it, but it really, this whole success depends on the committee. And so I wondered if anyone had a thought about that.
Only to say that, without a date, it can't definitively say, yes, I'm available. But if you get it onto my calendar sooner than later, I'm definitely, I like the twice a year meeting, keeping everyone engaged on various issues. So I will be a yes to meeting in the fall.
Okay, thank you, Salima. Other comments? Ron?
Yeah, sure. I'd just like to add, I think there's going to be a number of important issues coming up, and to the extent that we can continue to serve the community, I think that it's important that we get together in the fall, and look forward to any of the public suggestions that people provide on our internet site that they'd like us to talk about.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, I didn't do anything for prepping for this, so I'm happy to continue to listen and admire the work that you guys are doing. I very much appreciate it.
Would you be willing to help with the work?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just took on a new job last fall, so I'm settling in. So
good. Well, thank you. I appreciate your participation. Deborah?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, when we were a federally sanctioned advisory board, we also people served terms, and we refreshed our ranks with newcomers, and we might think about doing that as well, because especially in this kind of new formation of the committee, it's maybe helpful to have a slightly larger group to draw on as well, and people who are that, because the task is a little bit more porous, I would say, in the current circumstances. So I think that's something we might try to draw in a few slightly, replenish the committee. Whether people continue to leave as we would do in the past is an open question, but at least try to bring in a few more people to, and that gets to Andrew's point a little bit, which is, like leadership for taking on the remarks and bringing together the groups to discuss. So I would recommend, and I'm happy to continue to participate. I think they're useful. I would love to know if these things if there's response at the Census Bureau or other agencies that can make use of this information. But I guess we have to operate in a vacuum for the time being.
Right. When people ask me about that, I always say, I don't know. But what I do know is if we don't meet, there will be no impact.
Absolutely. Well put.
Yeah.
I concur.
So, okay, Rahelia and Sarah and Lance, I see your hands, but it's 3:05 and I need to move on. So I will come back to you later in the meeting to ask about this. Okay. So we should move on to the public comments. And Allison Plyer of will be presenting those. Allison was the chair of CSAC a couple of sessions, a couple of groups before me, and is very familiar with the operation of this group. Allison, go ahead.
Thank you, Barbara. So now it's time to read the public comments. I'm Allison Plyer, the co-chair of the Census Quality Reinforcement Task Force. And we want to thank the members of the public who submitted their comments for the Independent Census Scientific Advisory Committee and the Census Bureau's and for the Census Bureau's consideration. All public comments will be posted on the I-CSAC website, which is censusscientific.org, and they'll be submitted to the Census Bureau. So the first one comes from several groups: the Association of Population Centers, the Asian Americans Advancing Justice, the Census Project, the Insights Association, the NALEO Educational Fund, the Population Association of America, and the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And they write, on behalf of the hundreds of organizations representing data users in the public, private, nonprofit, and research sectors that submitted comments to the Department of Commerce and the U.S. Census Bureau regarding proposed changes to the 2026 census test, we are writing to express our concerns and disappointment in the March 23rd announcement regarding the final test design. In response to the 30-day comment period, which closed on March 5th, the Department of Commerce and the Census Bureau received 336 extensive, well-constructed comments from individuals, government officials, and organizations expressing concerns about the potential operational and cost implications of the agency's proposed changes to the 2026 census test. These changes included, among other things, eliminating 4 of the 6 original sites, fielding the American Community Survey rather than the decennial census questionnaire, and proposing the use of postal carriers as enumerators. While comments from individuals and organizations may have focused on the different facets of the proposed changes, the responses expressed concern about the exclusion of the only sites covering rural, remote regions, and key group quarters populations, specifically the only military installation and prison in the initial test design. Based on the final details released on March 23rd, it is apparent that our comments were not considered nor used to inform any changes to the 2026 census test, and the design continues to suffer from the same infirmities as were elucidated in these comments. Should the 2026 census test proceed as currently planned, it will not produce scientifically valid results that can inform improvements to the operations of the 2030 census and toward achieving the Census Bureau's mandate of counting every person. We urge Congress to assert its oversight authority and work intentionally with the Department of Commerce and the Census Bureau to revise its plans for the 2026 census test so preparations for the 2030 census can continue on a path that leads to an accurate, cost-effective, and inclusive constitutionally mandated decennial census. The next comment comes from Mark Mather. I want to raise a methodological concern regarding the 2026 operational test described in the recent Federal Register notice. The proposed test relies on the ACS methods panel and 2 metropolitan test sites. While useful for evaluating specific instruments or procedures, this design limits the ability to assess operational performance across environments historically associated with coverage risk, such as rural areas, tribal lands, group quarters populations, and low connectivity communities. From a research standpoint, the narrow geographic and operational scope raises questions about the external validity of findings used to inform the 2030 census operations. From the Coalition on Human Needs, I'll read aloud the summary version of their comments, which were provided by the author, but the full version will be uploaded to censusscientific.org and submitted to the Census Bureau. The Coalition on Human Needs is submitting these comments in support of efforts to improve the count of young children. First, we draw the committee's attention to a recent report by Jae-Jun Lee, Can Administrative Records Improve Young Child Undercounts in the Census? The analysis looks at the count of young children from 4 different sources of data: demographic analysis, the post-enumeration survey, the population estimates program, and the 2020 administrative record census simulation. All 4 sources showed a significant undercount of young children. However, the administrative records data show a different result than the other 3 sources of data. With demographic analysis and population estimates, the undercount got smaller, meaning the count improved as children got older. But with the administrative records, the count remains flat, with an undercount of nearly 6% for both age groups. There are also some puzzling results by age, sex, and race ethnicity. For Black children, the Administrative Record Census reports a far larger census undercount than the demographic analysis does. For Hispanic children, the opposite occurs. If the Bureau intends to rely more heavily on administrative records, it needs to research and understand this discrepancy and determine whether it can be corrected to improve accuracy. Second, we note that the Bureau has missed an important opportunity to improve the count of young children when it changed the 2026 census test. Child advocates have urged the Bureau for several years to test new strategies for counting young children. Tests of new strategies were included in the 2020 census test plans that were released in 2025. However, they were completely removed from the final plans. The Bureau should return to the original plan for the 2026 census test. If that means conducting the test later, that would be better than conducting this unscientific test that may produce misleading results and that fails to test any new strategies for counting young children. The Bureau should also find other opportunities to test new strategies for counting young children, including the 2028 dress rehearsal test and smaller scale tests. From Adeline Wilcox, we have another comment. Under Trump 2.0, the Federal Committee on Statistical Methodology conference held earlier this month was open only to current federal employees. The preliminary program lists 3 presentations about coverage measurement. All authors are U.S. Census Bureau employees. One of the abstracts by Scott Konicki states, for 2030 census coverage estimation, we plan to maximize our use of administrative records to produce dual system estimates. The same abstract also tells us, quote, in this paper, we propose a high-level design of the 2030 census coverage estimation to support the national and state-level estimates of net census coverage errors. It's my impression that the Census Bureau intends to replace the post-enumeration survey estimates with dual system estimates derived from administrative records. Apparently, the Census Bureau intends to make this change without informing the public or seeking public input. In the 2020 Census Evaluations and Experiments operation, the Census Bureau carried out an evaluation titled Administrative Records Dual System Estimation. The Census Bureau website says, while the Census Bureau conducted this evaluation, it will not externally release the accompanying report. Pretty shady of the Census Bureau to sneak this major change to 2030 census coverage measurement by us. And the final comment is from the Census Quality Reinforcement Task Force. To the Independent Census Scientific Advisory Committee, as co-chairs of the Census Quality Reinforcement Task Force, a nonpartisan, multidisciplinary learning community, we want to thank the members of I-CSAC for their dedication and willingness to step into a critical void. At a time when the Census Bureau experts have been cut off from peer review and constructive critique, your work is invaluable. I-CSAC members volunteering their time and expertise ensure that the Census Bureau continues to receive robust feedback that is essential to the scientific process. The Census Quality Reinforcement Task Force is deeply concerned that the 2026 operational test narrows field experimentation to such an extent that the 2030 census data quality will dramatically decline and costs will mushroom. The 2026 census test must do more than assess logistics of incorporating USPS workers as enumerators. It needs to rigorously test innovations that can close the persistent inaccuracies that have plagued past counts. Notably, the revised test plan eliminated test sites in Western Texas, Arizona, and Western North Carolina, locations specifically chosen to generate data on hard-to-reach rural populations and tribal lands with limited or no internet, cell, or postal service. Such rural areas are among the hardest to count, and training postal workers as enumerators will do little to increase the accuracy of counting these residents. The Bureau made a similar decision in 2018, cutting rural test sites, and accuracy shortfalls that followed in 2020 fell heavily on Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi, Florida, Illinois, and Texas, each undercounted by 2 to 5%. The focus of the 2026 test on incorporating USPS workers as enumerators is not well structured. There's no articulated methodology for assessing the cost effectiveness of using USPS workers as enumerators, nor has the Bureau articulated its methodology for assessing the accuracy of the data collected by the USPS workers. How the Bureau will measure increased effectiveness should be clearly delineated. Additional objectives to evaluate and refine key processes, including in-field enumeration, are similarly lacking in clear research questions with articulated methodologies. And I think the time is up. So there are a couple more paragraphs there, but we'll put that up on the website for all to read. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Allison. I really appreciate those comments, and they dovetail nicely with how the meeting has been going, and the kinds of things that we have been discussing. So now it's time to move on to the second topic, and that is administrative records coverage by race, ethnicity, and it will be presented by Dr. John Chunka. So, John.
Thank you, Barbara. The committee that put this together also included Gwen, Lance, and Alex. Next slide, please. So why do we care about the race and ethnicity coverage of administrative records? Well, the Census Bureau is planning to expand its use of administrative records. It's contributing to the 2030 census. I would note that the 2020 census was the first to use administrative records to actually enumerate a portion of the households. This was done as part of the non-response follow-up operations, and the main intent was to reduce costly in-person visits. The NRFU operations are the most expensive part of the census. The application in 2020 targeted housing units that did not self-respond and were not resolved in NRFU after an initial in-person visit. The administrative records enumeration assigned rosters to 18.4% of the occupied households in NRFU. So it was not a trivial component, but far from the majority. The Census Bureau anticipates that the 2030 census will use administrative records to enumerate a larger fraction of households than in 2020. In 2020, the household self-response rate actually was maintained from what had been observed in 2010. I think it'd be unrealistic to assume that's going to be the case 2030, which means expanded NRFU operations. It's also the case that lessons that were learned from the 2020 application should enable a broader application without a reduction in quality, improve modeling, and we'll have some recommendations as well. Another planned use of administrative records for the 2030 census is to assist in evaluating frame coverage and quality. I don't know in detail what that means, but it certainly seems a useful application of these data. The Census Bureau is also exploring the possible use of administrative records to add young children to household rosters from which they may have been omitted. This is a really interesting application. No details yet on how this might work. Next slide, please. So it's important to understand how administrative records are used in the administrative records enumeration. Basically, this was designed as a cost-saving operation. As I said, the NRFU operations are the most expensive part of the Census Bureau when people actually have to be hired to go out and visit the households that didn't respond. The Census Bureau notes that by doing some portion of NRFU by administrative records, they can, quote, focus on enumerating those who have been historically undercounted or hard to count, such as individuals who are rural residents, have language barriers, and are very young children, people of color, people with disabilities, and renters. So in theory, the non-respondents who cannot be captured with administrative records will be picked up with these in-person field operations. However, without improvements in those operations, these activities are not likely to eliminate the historic undercount cited above. Next slide. Now, there are two major challenges in trying to assess the coverage of administrative records by race and ethnicity. One is that in order to ensure adequate population coverage, multiple administrative sources have to be combined, and when they're combined, records have to be unduplicated and conflicting characteristics have to be resolved. In other words, we can't take one major source like the Internal Revenue Service and make an assessment about administrative records. We really need to combine multiple sources. And the second major difficulty is that Data on race and ethnicity in major federal administrative record sources is either lacking or of variable or poor quality. For example, neither the Internal Revenue Service nor the Medicaid program collects race or ethnicity. The Social Security Administration collects such data on the application for SSNs, but these categories have changed dramatically over time, and the SSA receives no data on race and ethnicity from enumeration at birth, which started in 1987. So this means that basically for 2 generations of the population, we are only getting data on race and ethnicity if they file for a change of name or a lost Social Security card. Those who got their SSNs at birth, we don't get this information. State sources are better. The Medicaid program, which is very large, collects race and ethnicity. They send these data to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, but these data, by the time they're processed, they're late. There's highly variable quality in the race and ethnicity data collected from the states. Food stamp program is another very large program, but SNAP data are not routinely sent to the federal government, and so that's a source that's not universally available. Next slide. Now, as noted in one or two of the comments, the Census Bureau in 2020 conducted an experimental administrative record census. This was done in real time, meaning it was conducted within the time frame of the 2020 census. This census used 31 sources of administrative and third-party commercial data, and it's notable that each of these sources made at least some unique contribution to the total count. The sources had to be available within the time frame of the census, and this eliminated some potential sources, or it made it necessary to substitute older data. For example, this administrative record census did include Medicaid data, but they were from 2016 because that's what was available within the 2020 census timeframe. In order to assign race and ethnicity to the enumerated persons, the Census Bureau relied heavily on its Best Race and Ethnicity File, or BREF. This is a file that's constructed from prior responses to the American Community Survey and to the census and other sources that the Bureau can put together. The linkage rates between this file and the administrative census were very high because the vast majority of enumerated persons in the administrative record census had SSNs, and SSN linkage is the most reliable way to link back to this file. But the file does not cover the entire population, and the balance of race and ethnicity assignments had to be based on less reliable administrative sources. It's notable that the administrative record census counted nearly 8 million more persons than the 2020 census, and there was a notable excess of non-US citizens. Next slide. So the administrative census record census provides a good way to evaluate administrative records coverage. It had very broad population coverage, and it compared the Census Bureau in its really detailed, an excellent report on this effort, compared the administrative census to the 2020 census to assess coverage by demographic characteristics. Now, it's important to note that changes to how race and ethnicity were collected and edited in the 2020 census make this comparison problematic because the BREF that provided most of the race and ethnicity data for the administrative record census would have reflected the earlier race and ethnicity data collection and editing. We suggest that the 2019 American Community Survey provides race and ethnicity data that would be more comparable to what the AR census was collecting. Next slide. I would also add that because the BREF uses the category some other race as one of the categories, The population estimates program does not. And so the population estimates program, which does collect data, report data by race and ethnicity, wouldn't be comparable to what's available in the administrative record census. At this table, even though the population totals are different, I think it's useful to look at some of these raw numbers before looking at the proportions. And one thing that's very notable in comparing the 2019 ACS and the 2020 census, that is the first and the third columns, is we see the impact of the changes in collection and editing of race and ethnicity. Most notable are the substantial increases in persons of 2 or more races and some other race, and corresponding reduction in the white category. But both the American Indian, Alaska Native, and the Asian categories show increases as well between the ACS and the 2020 census. And I would note that if you were to look at the 2021 ACS, you would find estimates very similar to the 2020 census, meaning that you clearly see the impact of the change in editing if you're comparing ACS sources just 1 or 2 years apart. Because of the difference in total population count, with the AR census being much higher than either of these other sources, if the racial composition were the same, every AR census count would be higher than the corresponding census or ACS count. What we see is that in general, the administrative record census aligns more closely to the ACS than to the census, as we expected, but with markedly more persons identified as Black, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, some other race, and especially American Indian, Alaska Native, but with markedly fewer identified as Asian or 2 or more races. So in the next slide, we'll look at the distributions by proportions. So compared to the ACS, the administrative record census finds higher proportions of Black, American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and some other race, but lower proportions of white, Asian, and 2 or more races. Compared to the 2020 census, the administrative record census finds higher proportions of white, Black, American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and lower proportions of Asian, some other race, and especially 2 or more races. Next slide. So if we combine race and Hispanic ethnicity in the way that these two are commonly presented, we see that the differences in the racial distributions among the non-Hispanic persons across all 3 sources are muted compared to race overall that we had looked at on the previous slide. The higher American Indian, Alaska Native, some other race, and Hispanic shares in the administrative census stand out, as does the lower Asian share. And I would note here that the higher Hispanic share in the administrative record census will tend to lower the non-Hispanic shares for all of the other races. This is most evident for the non-Hispanic groups, white, Black, and Asian. Next slide. Within the Hispanic population, unlike the non-Hispanic population, differences between the ACS and the 2020 census are striking, meaning that most of the differences that were produced as a result of changes in data collection and editing really hit within the Hispanic population. We see a much smaller share of white and much larger shares of some other race, and especially 2 or more races in the 2020 census compared to the ACS. For the white and some other race and 2 or more races, the AR census compares much more closely to the ACS than to the 2020 census. The Black, Asian, and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander populations are markedly higher in the AR census than in either the ACS or the 2020 census, while the American Indian, Alaska Native population is much closer to the census than to the ACS. And keep in mind that because these percentages are calculated relative to the total population, the fact that the Hispanic share is higher in the administrative record census is going to push up these estimates by race. Next slide. Well, we see that the racial ethnic distributions in the AR census compare more closely to the ACS than to the 2020 census. There are still notable differences. Now, the Census Bureau calculated an alternative administrative record census distribution in which the 2020 census demographic characteristics were assigned to matched administrative record census records. In other words, the characteristics assigned from the BREF were replaced with what was observed in the census. In all, 78.32% of the administrative record census records could be linked to 2020 census persons. The fact that this isn't higher is because only 83.6% of the 2020 census persons could be assigned a unique identifier, the protected identification key that the Census Bureau uses for all of its linkages. And interestingly, this compares to a 90.4% peak rate in the 2010 census. The fact that it dropped in 2020 reflects people giving more incomplete names or other aspects of what are used for the linkages. So the differences in the racial ethnic distributions are going to be due to the unmatched records. So although most of these really represent the same persons, they just couldn't be matched. Next slide. So with the assignment of the 2020 census demographic characteristics to match records, it turns out that 266 million records have the same demographic characteristics, while there are 73 million AR census records and 65 million census records that have potentially different characteristics. So it's these unmatched records that are going to drive the differences that we see here. And I exclude the ACS from these comparisons because it makes much more sense to just focus on the census. So by substituting the census demographic characteristics for the AR census characteristics moves the two distributions much closer together in every category. The AR census shortfall for Asians is virtually eliminated. The very large differences for white, some other race, and two or more races, they're substantially reduced as well, although marked differences remain. Not shown here, the AR census estimate of the Hispanic population was reduced by 3 million, but a difference of 7 million still remains. Next slide. So essentially, looking across all the racial groups, all differences between the AR census and the 2020 census have been greatly reduced. Only small differences remain for the AIAN, Asian, and Native Hawaiian population, Pacific Islander populations. Larger differences remain for whites and some other races. Again, these differences are due to the unmatched records, which continue to show their original assignments. Next slide. So among non-Hispanic persons, differences for all but the white share have been reduced. The differences in the non-Hispanic share, the Hispanic share has been reduced as well. Next slide. I'm going to skip to 2 slides and move ahead to the recommendations. I'll skip the summary. Next slide, please. So we have recommendations regarding frame improvement. One, we recommend that the Census Bureau include no less than the full scope of administrative records used in the 2020 experimental administrative records census in developing and evaluating the master address file for 2030. We also recommend that the Census Bureau research the apparent underrepresentation of Asian persons in the AR census, which is largely a measurement problem, and explore ways to improve the identification and possibly the coverage of this population in administrative records. Next slide. With regard to administrative records enumeration, I-CSAC acknowledges the cost-saving value of allocating a portion of NRFU operations to administrative records, as well as the success in 2020. We note that the 2020 administrative records enumeration used far fewer sources, only 5, than the administrative records census. We recommend that the Census Bureau explore expanding the set of administrative sources in ways that may enhance Hispanic and immigrant household enumeration. And lastly, I-CSAC recommends that the Census Bureau complement its administrative records enumeration with NERFU operation improvements to better enumerate NERFU households that administrative records are likely to miss. And thank you.
Thank you, John. That was great. I really appreciate your careful presentation that moves sort of point by point through the materials. Let me share our Google Doc, which goes back through the recommendations that you were making. So the first one had to do with frame improvement. And I wonder, let's do these one at a time. So the first one is about the scope of the administrative records used and especially as they relate to the master address file. Is that a fair way to say it?
Sure.
Yeah, you're welcome to read
I was going
it.
to say that the point here is that the Bureau used 31 sources in its administrative record census, and every one of them contributed at least something to identifying people. So if we're going to use the administrative data to help improve the master address file, let's use as many sources as possible.
Okay, great. Questions or comments about that one? John, I'm just curious, is there a list anywhere of all of those administrative sources?
Yes, in fact, this report is really good. If you're at all interested in this topic, get the report and read it. They include a table in which they show for every one of the 31 sources how many records it contributed and how many unique persons were identified by that source. There are a lot of other statistics as well. But I think that was really useful to see. And a number of these sources, as I mentioned, the administrative record census found a lot more foreign-born persons than identified in the census.
Right. Great. Any other questions, comments on this first one? Are we ready to vote on it? Okay, great. So all in favor of approving this first recommendation? Great. It looks like everybody, from what I can see. I have only parts of the, of our, I wonder maybe I can do this. No. Okay, great. Let's move on to the second one. And I have a question for you. Andrew, are you still voting? Or are you, okay. I have a question for you, John, about this one. I mean, do you have a hypothesis about why Asians are underrepresented in the AR census?
I do. The Census Bureau, one of the things that they did in this really good report was to break down differences between the AR census and the 2020 census by actual differences in reported characteristics versus imputation, where one or the other characteristic, or maybe both, was imputed. And they also looked at duplication. The IR Administrative Record Census found like 5 million duplicates in the 2020 census. But what was interesting about the Asian population is the vast majority of the differences when they substituted the 2020 census data was due to imputation. So it's suggesting that the data source that's contributing the race and ethnicity to the administrative records census is under-imputing Asians. And it does seem to be imputing them as whites versus Asians. That's kind of an indirect inference. But clearly there's some work that needs to be done on the demographic data that are attached to the administrative record census. And if if those improvements aren't made, we're going to see the same kind of issues if they do this again.
Thank you. That was helpful. Other comments or questions? Okay, are we ready to vote on this one? This is recommending that the Bureau research the apparent underrepresentation of Asian persons in the AR census. How many vote in favor of approval? Okay, thank you. I think that's everyone. Great, thank you, John. I will scroll down to the next ones. You had two more, I believe.
Right.
So, so the first one has to do with expanding the set of administrative sources. Do you want to just remind us of what that issue was?
Sure. When the Census Bureau did the administrative records enumeration in 2020, they used only 5 administrative sources. Now, this is partly an issue of what's available at the time, but the fact that with 31 sources and all of them contributed something, the administrative records census showed that you really get a lot of bang for the buck by adding extra sources. It would seem that the Bureau ought to try to expand beyond those 5 sources to at least several more. Now, we're not trying to cover the whole population with these enumerations, but still more sources would be helpful, and especially those that would enhance the Hispanic and immigrant household enumeration that are going to be difficult even with the boots on the ground NERFU operations.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? Seeing none, let's go ahead and vote. How many vote to approve this recommendation? Okay, thank you. And then one final recommendation, John.
Sure. And the background here is that the Bureau makes the argument that by using a low-cost method to enumerate a portion of the NERFU operation, they can devote more resources to especially enumerating the hard-to-count populations. And while that's true, it isn't going to happen unless you find ways to work harder and enumerating those populations. And so if the argument is we can therefore devote more resources to the hard to count groups, let's find better ways to use those resources and not just throw the resources at them.
All right, thank you. Questions for John, comments about this? Okay, I'll vote. How many vote to approve this recommendation? Great. Thank you. Okay, so that concludes the recommendations from the second group, administrative records coverage by race, ethnicity. And because we have been so efficient in our use of time, we have earned a slightly longer break than the one originally planned, which is wonderful. So we had originally planned to reassemble at 4:05. And so if we do that, that gives you 20 minutes rather than 10 minutes as a break now. I know I will enjoy that 20 minutes. So thanks for everybody to be efficient and move this along quickly. I think Taylor's going to put up a screen that says yes, there we go. So feel free to turn off your screens. There's mine. Well, welcome back, everyone. We've just taken a short break, and at this time are ready to move on to our third presentation, which is called the Race Ethnicity Coding Improvement Project, and the discussant is Rogelio Sins. Rogelio, take it away.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to recognize and thank the other committee members, Christine, Salima, and Patricia. Next slide. Okay, so here with this is the Race and Ethnic Coding Improvement Project, and it's based upon the changes that are being made and the development of the coding list are to be consistent with the OMB SPD 15 standards here, using a single combined race and ethnicity question that allows for multiple responses, adding the MENA, the Middle Eastern or North African, as a minimum reporting category, separate and distinct from the white category, and also collecting more detail beyond the minimum race and ethnicity reporting categories. And essentially, the documents that we had that we examined to put together this report was the Federal Register call for public feedback on the Race and Ethnic Improvement Project, and then the Census Bureau. The committee did a presentation back in 2024, November 2024, updating their progress that was taking place. Next slide. So then the race ethnicity code list here, these are responses that must fit into the required reporting categories specified as in OMB SPD, the 15, the previous slide. It also shows how detailed responses to the race and ethnicity question are coded as well as classified. And then finally, the codes connect directly to how published estimates, and this is very important, how published estimates and counts are tabulated, both in the ACS as well as the decennial census. So these are very important codes because they determine the tabulations and how they're developed. Next slide. And this is the code list here. So it has contents within the race ethnicity code list. So we can see then the major category headers. That is, the code is 4,000 to 4999, and that is the overall Asian racial category. And then there is also the group headers. So you can see there with for the Japanese population, it's 4040 to 4049, and then you have 4040 Japanese, and this would be the checkbox, individuals who checked the category, the racial category for Japanese, and then you have 4041 others, people who filled in Japanese, Ainu, Japan, Japonesa, etc. And then you also have the code descriptions, again, those 4041, 40 within the Japanese category, and then 4042 within the Okinawan category. So this provides you kind of the all the categories that that comprise a particular racial category. Next slide. And here we have a variety of race and ethnicity responses, and again, it illustrates the manner in which these data are put together. So you have some of these that would be the nationalities, for example, Chinese, Argentinian. You also have those transnational groups that exist across international boundaries, the Roma, the Hmong, the subnational ethnic groups, the ethno-religious responses, the pan-ethnic terms such as the Arab pan-ethnic category as well as Latino, then broad geographic terms such as European and African, then the multiracial, multi-ethnic responses such as the mixed and the two or more races, the multiracial, and then also including federally and state recognized tribes and villages, as well as unrecognized tribes. And these would be like the Cherokee, for example, and the Navajo Nation. And then you also have with respect to the Canadian First Nations and the Central and South American Indian groups such as Maya, Broken Head, Ojibwe, and Nation. Next slide. And here's where the Census Bureau, then the request for public comment. And this is what was put together in the Federal Register. So the Census Bureau is seeking feedback on the proposed race and ethnicity code list that will be used again to combine race and ethnicity. The question on a combined race and ethnicity question that will be implemented in the American Community Survey as well as in the 2030 census. And here the Bureau aims to enhance and improve the code list that was used in the 2020 census and that is currently used in the ACS to ensure that detailed race and ethnicity responses are accurately coded and tabulated in future data collection. And it's important here, some background here that the Census Bureau notes that for the 2020 census, that it improved the coding list to add new unique codes, especially for white, Black, or African American MENA categories, and so forth. And they note that the 2020 census improvement elicited much more reporting of detailed racial and ethnic identities. For example, in the 2010, there were 55 million write-ins, and there were 350 million write-ins in the 2020 census. And John provided an overview of how the distribution of the race and ethnicity changed. So with this in mind, the Census Bureau is looking at stakeholders to provide to play a critical role in this process. And keep in mind that that large scale, what was it, about almost 8 times more people filling in write-in categories in 2020 than 2010 produced those increases, for example, particularly in the multiracial categories as well as the some other race. So those are things to keep in mind. And one of the recommendations that we will make concerns the building the crosswalks, for example, to be able to connect data backwards as well as forward. But I'll talk about that in a few more minutes. Next slide. And here, so in the call for public input on developing this list, then the Census Bureau has specific questions for public comment. So one of these is, are there any groups that are missing from the proposed code list? And if so, if people could identify what those are and to suggest how they should be classified and why. And then a second question is, are any groups on the proposed code list misclassified? So again, they have the list of race categories and sub-race categories, and to see if there's any misclassifications that are taking place, and to identify them and suggest alternative ways of classifying them, or to indicate if the term should be removed. And in addition, they're asked, are there any alternative terms, abbreviations, or in-language terms that people use? So here you're particularly targeting individuals who belong to these particular groups that people may use to identify with a specific group that should be added to the proposed list. And again, if so, then identify them and suggest a classification. And next slide. And then in addition, the Census Bureau is proposing to remove its definitions and concepts of regional categories using the disaggregated data. So here you would have, for example, Eastern Asian, for example, and so forth, those directional regional kinds of categories. And given that they're going to that they're proposing to make the this change, they're asking individuals then how they use the data that are produced for regional categories from the 2020 census. How would removing the regional categories from the code list and the tabulated products impact their ability to use the detailed race and ethnicity data, and also with the ability to create their own regional categories using disaggregated data be useful to their work. So these are the kinds of questions and more specific details that they're trying to get from the public. Next slide. And there were a total of 2,213 responses, so quite a bit. And there wasn't any document that we could find that provided kind of an overview or the categorization of these particular comments from the public. So we undertook data analysis here using AI. And here are the prompts down at the bottom. You have the prompts that were used to provide the parameters for putting the information, organizing the information and putting this together. And we'll provide here a summary of the public comments. One, there's a broad support for the combined race and ethnicity question. So the new question that we're going to have where it's race and ethnicity together rather than the ethnicity question followed by the race question, there seems to be pretty broad support. There's also the broad support for the expansion of the detailed subgroup coding, as well as the alignment with the updated federal standards, the OMB SPD 15. And here, very importantly, this support is conditioned on the coding retaining the respondents' intent, what respondents were intending with respect to these categories, and also very importantly, the analyzability, so that the intent of what people were bringing forth and using to categorize themselves racially and ethnically, and also that the analysis makes sense with these particular development of these categories. And then there seems to also be a series of methodological concerns. One of these is the coding rules that may reinterpret responses. And here, the idea is just not to just classify, but in terms of what the rules are, and the caution here is interpreting and not just classifying. And here we have the write-ins introducing a degree of ambiguity, and so that we may think that we're resolving some of the issues as we do the coding, but that recoding that is done also produces ambiguity. And then another methodological concern is the Bureau risks constructing identity rather than measuring it. And I think that this was one of the concerns that was coming out of the 2020 census, where we saw a significant increase in terms of the multiracial categories and the sum of the race. So it's important then that we're not that we don't lose sight that we're trying to measure these particular racial and ethnic categories, and that we're not creating identities that we're constructing and are not really coming from what the respondents intended to communicate. And then very importantly also is that aggregated categories mask disparities experienced by subpopulations. So as we put these groups together, for example, the Latino population and the different categories that comprise that population, as well as the Asian population and others, that we not forget that the greater degree of diversity we have, we also see that oftentimes those disparities get lost in the mix, so that there may be some groups that are significantly different than the overall pan-ethnic group, and making sure that these disparities are not lost. And then very importantly, again, is the need to trust that the results reflect real population demographics and are not a shift based on the changing methods, for example, or the changing ways that we're going to construct racial and ethnic categories. And this is what we note here, kind of a faux inflation of multiracial counts that just saw dramatic increases in the multiracial individuals as well as the some other race categories. And there's also a lot of concern that with the combination of the race and ethnic categories, particularly with the Latino population, and that there may be a decrease in the Afro-Latino population, individuals that in the past easily saw themselves both as African American or Black as well as Latino. And we did see that in the 2020 census, that while all Latino categories, racial subgroups of the Latino population increased, the one category that decreased was the Afro-Latino population. Next slide, please. And then there were also procedural concerns here. One of these was testing and evaluation that is needed. So one of these examples would be looking at cognitive testing and coding outcomes, testing and doing analysis, whether people understand the procedures, the instructions, and particularly the kinds of research that was done to make sure that people were able to follow through and understand responses that they were to provide under the scenarios, for example, of a separate race and ethnic category, as well as those that are put together. And then there's also, with the procedural concern, the backward compatibility needed to bridge historical data. And that's what I mentioned earlier, that there continues to be the need for the development of crosswalks and procedures between the old and the new classifications. And in the 2010, and as we went from the 2010 census to the 2020 census, there was a lot of concern about those big differences that took place, and we have yet to see those particular crosswalks. And then we're going to need not only that backward historical, but looking into the future as well. And then the transparency and public access that are related to the coding algorithms that are developed to do the coding and to classify people, the right in handling the editing procedures, as well as the recoding frequencies and validation studies as well. And then the importance also for a call for ongoing public community engagement, making sure that the concerns that people have regarding trust continue to be minimized, and we believe that having that very strong community engagement and ongoing discussion of the changes that are being made are extremely important. And here we also note the summarized risks. One of these is a weakening of civil rights data infrastructure and policy utility. And here, of course, there are concerns, just like back in the 2020 census, but even more so today, issues having to do with enforcement. Right now, as we see the mass deportation that is taking place, the racial profiling and so forth, that these are types of concerns that are very, very serious in terms of making sure that that the public is engaged and understands and trusts the Census Bureau and the procedures that they're developing. And then there's the coding-induced distortion of population structure. Again, as these codes change, making sure that they are real and not just induced by some of the coding and recoding that is taking place. And as we know with tribal communities, there is undercounting that takes place. And here, many tribal citizens write tribal identity differently than the federal administrative list, and making sure that there is as much overlap as possible so that we minimize those undercounts. And the next slide. So some of the considerations in coding that we discussed, we talked about the identification of race and ethnicity is based on the different lived experiences and the different psychological constructs. So realizing that when people are selecting racial categories and so forth, that it depends very much on where they are, where they live, where they grew up, and so forth. So trying to get very closely into the experiences of individual. And again, that is that requires that ongoing close community engagement, particularly with communities of color, such as tribal communities, Latino population, African American populations, and so forth. And of course, now with the MENA category as well. And it's important to realize also that multiple indicators and the ancestry data in particular are extremely useful, and they allow us to do all sorts of analysis, checks and rechecks and so forth, but they also can contribute complications. But we stress the importance of the ancestry information and making sure that we continue to pay close attention to this, because this is extremely valuable data that are needed even when we have the multiple racial categories that are numerous that they continue to be very important. And then finally, the new categories may take time to catch on, especially in the context of heightened profiling and so forth. So there may be cases where they may be relatively small numbers for particular subcategories that are within racial categories, but it is important that we not give up on those simply because the numbers are small, but it may reflect the the political contextual situation that may result that people may not be willing to place themselves in particular racial subcategories, and making sure that those continue having a space that allow us to be able to tabulate them. Next slide, please. And here we have the implications of the revised coding. How do we deal with historical comparisons? And again, we're dealing with these very complex kinds of issues as we are now in race and ethnicity being combined. And what does that really mean from a difference from an earlier time when we had race and ethnicity that were considered separately, and as well as with the racial combinations. And a second one is, does lack of transparency decrease the trust in census data products that include race and ethnicity? So again, the importance of making sure that the Bureau is as transparent as possible in the decisions that they are making and in the coding that they are developing. And then how do we ensure that the data reflect the population and are not a methodological artifact? And as you can tell, this is one point that we have continued to stress here, making sure that these particular changes that are taking place in coding are real and reflect real demographic populations, and not artifacts of methodological changes. Next slide. And then the Census Bureau is in the next steps right now in phase 3, which is from the winter 2025 to spring 2026. And what the Census Bureau is doing right now is its race and ethnicity team is carefully reviewing all feedback, having discussions with OMB's Federal Committee on SPD 15, and updating the code list accordingly. And very significantly is that all updates that are made must meet 3 criteria. 1, there must be strong federal scientific research and evidence supporting the update. 2, the stakeholder feedback supports the update. And then 3, the update aligns with the definitions of the minimum reporting categories in the updated SPD 15. And the next slide here.
Yes,
And
okay, Rogelio, if I can interrupt for a second. I'm going to substitute the Google Doc for this, so we can just go directly to that, if that's okay with you. It says the same thing.
Okay.
But I just thought maybe that would just save a little time. Okay. There you go.
All right. So then the first of our recommendations is I-CSAC recommends that the Census Bureau continue solicitation of feedback beyond the docket from all stakeholders as to sustain and build trust in data. And again, this is the point that we have emphasized here, that this is an ongoing kind of community engagement and seeking feedback in order to increase the trust with the general public. A second.
I'm going to interrupt again, and let's discuss this first one.
Okay.
Because we're running a little short of time, so I'm just condensing a little bit. Any comments or questions about this? I think Rogelio gave us a very complete and detailed sort of discussion and rationale, and I appreciated the use of AI. That was a nice little touch.
Barbara,
yes.
Your screen, it needs to be, the document needs to be maximized, or
is that better?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Thank you. Any comments, questions?
Just a quick one.
You must have had, do you have two, do you have a phone as well as a laptop?
My hearing aids.
Oh. Oh, that's too bad. That would drive me crazy. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Any other comments that people have about this first one while Ron goes and gets himself fixed up? No.
I will just say then when I looked back at the data for this recommendation, at the docket for this recommendation, the stakeholders were specifically requesting in-community outreach events and not just things on the docket, so that they would actually get to some of the people perhaps that have been undercounted and can provide that insight with regards to, you know, how we identify, how we write down our tribal names and things like that. So
I think that was the intent. It says beyond the docket, but should we add a little phrase that says including in community? How did you say it, Salima? You said it in a good way.
Oh gosh, see, people always say that, and I never remember how I said something. I'm okay with if you think just like keeping it beyond the docket implies, not online.
Yeah, I think that where your cursor is now, putting comma, including via
in-person community.
in-person community engagement or something like that. Yeah, comma, there you go.
Okay. Any other changes? Everybody okay with that?
How about timely solicitation? Because time has been a big issue.
That's good.
When it happens, it's after the fact,
Yeah, that's good. We ready to vote on this one? You okay with these changes, Rogelio?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, could I see a show of hands for approving this recommendation? Great. Okay, Rogelio, how about number 2?
Okay. Number 2 is again here we're looking at many ways in which the work is being done to make the changes and so forth. And we're looking at making it efficient with constructing the short and long-term ways to address methodological and procedure issues that are related to the coding.
Okay. Comments, questions about that one?
Is the term coding being used? Is imputation included in coding? Because as John pointed out earlier, the Asians being recoded as white during imputation.
So this would be we didn't discuss that. Salima, do you know if there was any discussion on this?
It didn't come up. I can ask again because I've kept it open. But
yeah, it doesn't. It's just because coding is usually what coding up the written answers, and imputation would then follow after either a non-response or a nonsensical.
Andrew, I agree with you on this one.
So it should say related to coding and imputation.
Okay.
More than that.
Okay.
Editing.
Coding, editing, and imputation.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. And it did come up, by the way. When dealing with AI, you have to ask it lots of questions. That it's a conversation.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So related to coding, editing, and imputation. Any other changes people would like to see? That's great. So everyone in favor of approving this? Oh, Ron, did you want to say something?
Wait a second. The one thing I wanted to say on this was that if you're going to make changes, hopefully they're going to apply it to a prior census so that you could see what the impact is. And if you don't do that, you're going to lose the longevity of it, and effectively you're going to destroy your racial characteristics over time.
So you want to construct and test long and short run, is that okay?
Yes. Even if it's just back to the prior census.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Vote to approve, show of hands. Great, thank you. Okay, Rogelio, we're just clipping along here.
Okay, and the third one, based upon again the fluidity that takes place and so forth, I-CSAC recommends that the Census Bureau recognize fluidity of categories in light of an increasingly diverse population. So as we see greater degrees of diversity, also recognizing that fluidity that exists within categories.
So this one, I have a question, Rogelio. What does it mean for them to recognize it? Do you want them to somehow include it in a different way? Do you know what I mean? They can say, okay, yeah, we recognize that, and
Yeah.
then move on. So I'm
Salima,
not sure.
Salima, do you have any insights?
I'm trying to think because, I was having a conversation and someone told me that about this meeting. Someone told me that their friend many, like 30 years ago, identified as Black, but now identifies as multiracial because now she sees it as more accepting and open. And so the very same person will show up in a census differently with regard to race. That speaks to that fluidity, but how methodologically, how do we account for that? Because it's not just more multi-racial, multi-ethnic people being born. It's
Okay, how about to recognize and develop and assess the consequences of the fluidity of categories, or to recognize and somehow incorporate the fluidity, but we want them to evaluate it, I think.
Yeah. So that would kind of go with that backward when doing that backward compatibility, perhaps they need to take into account the fluidity of categories and light of increasingly diverse population and openness about reporting multiple races.
Sure. Okay, Sarah.
Yeah, I was going to recommend that it's not, I guess my concern about the phrasing is that there are an increasing number of categories. The categories themselves are not fluid. The number of categories has increased. What's fluid is the people identifying, they're increasingly diverse in how they identify themselves. So I think we need to reverse the
fluidity of
increasing
people's racial identification or so.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I have recognized the fluidity of identity in relation to categories in light of an increasingly, does that capture it? I'm open to revision. Okay,
I think it does a better job. I'm just trying to think through it.
Okay, if you come up with that recommendation. Okay, Bonnie.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this is a place to also add something about community and stakeholder engagement to better understand that fluidity. I know that's, a point in the first recommendation, but perhaps of value to put here as well.
Yeah.
How would you recommend we do that?
Great question. So not just recognize, but
investigate, perhaps.
Solicit stakeholder feedback.
Yeah.
Okay. Andrew, I see you have your hand raised.
Intentionally, yes. I would probably say fluidity over time, because at least you describe dynamics, over time, and so fluidity could also mean that you want to apportion certain percentages to certain identities, but.
I'm going to say on that one, there is a literature that shows that how people identify depends on the context in which they're asked. So it's not only over time, it can be across.
And context,
yeah.
Fluidity can just stand on its own then if it's broad enough,
Any
maybe
other?
about the temporal and contextual fluidity.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. I was thinking these are a bit terse, Rogelio. We're elaborating them. Okay. Are we ready to vote? Okay. Can I see a show of hands of those who approve this one? Terrific. So we got one more to go.
Okay, and then we talked about this, the crosswalks and so for the need for that. So I-CSAC recommends that the Census Bureau develop procedures slash crosswalks to allow comparability of past and future changes in the coding of race and ethnicity.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. Right to the point. Any questions, comments about that? Any elaborations? Okay, I'm gonna zoom ahead and ask for a vote of approval for this one. Fantastic. Okay.
And I apologize for going past time. I didn't see
Oh,
the
no
little-
worries, Rogelio. If it had gotten to be too much of a problem, I just would have interrupted. And I did kind of interrupt and to move it to this section.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I think
Thank
it's
you.
fine and we're right on time. So that's all good. I wanted to say on the issue of future meetings, I will get in touch with everybody, but in particular with Sarah, Lance, and Rogelio, who have opinions but didn't have a chance to express them. But I hesitate to extend this meeting too far. So I guess what I want to say in closing it, first of all, does anybody want to make closing remarks? I'm going to make some. Okay. I want to say that the document that we put together contains all of the recommendations that we have voted on and are promulgating. I will number them. I didn't want to get into numbering issues in case we were adding and subtracting, but I'll go ahead and number them. But this will be, placed on our website for others to see, and we will send it to the director and the deputy director of the Bureau. So, which is what we would do when we were, before we became independent. So I just wanted to say that we're running this meeting very much in the transparent way that the CSAC meetings were run. And I think that's a plus and something that is worth the extra effort. So I'm going to go ahead with a few concluding remarks. I want to say it's been my privilege to chair this meeting, the spring 2026 meeting of the I-CSAC. I'm really proud of the work that we've done. I'm really impressed. I know you're not supposed to say that, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think that the work, just a tremendous amount. I mean, we are illustrating exactly, what we said was needed. The benefit of some outside looks of a group of experts. And I think the presentations that the groups have put together are worthwhile just on their own. And I hope people will refer to them. And of course, the recommendations I think are really useful. So I'm very proud of all of that, and I hope you all are too. We will discuss the future of this group, but we'll do it mainly offline, I guess. And I think that it's important for us to do that in thinking forward, and that includes both, should we continue, and then also if we do, how do we recruit some new members? And there are various ways to think about that, but I'll be in touch. But now I want to say some thank yous. There's so many who contributed to making this such a successful meeting. And, first of all, you all, the members of the committee, I'm so grateful for all of the work that was done. Many people pitched in to make this meeting possible, and with the presentations and the recommendations. So thank you for your willingness to contribute your commitment to this project. I really appreciate it. I want to, give a special thanks and shout out to the subcommittee leads, Sarah Curran, Ron Prevost, John Chaika, and Rogelio Sands. It's a heavy lift. I know I've done it. And so there's a lot of work that goes into these presentations. And I just want to say, I really, really appreciate it. Thanks as well to Allison Plyer, Taylor Sable, and Dorian Cowell of the Census Quality Task Force for their help and support with this meeting and the planning for it. I mean, I think it's a very professionally done. And if it were a bunch of professors just bumbling around on Zoom, it would not have that same impact and appearance. So I really appreciate it, and I'm very sort of proud of the product then. I want to say thank you to Connie Citro, if she's still on. I know she was on for part of it. You really got us off to a great start, and I really appreciate your comments and hope that they're immortalized somewhere, because there's not only inspiring, but lots of important information. And finally, thanks to those on YouTube who have taken the time to listen in on our meeting, and I hope that we hear from you. It's really appreciated. So this concludes the formal meeting of I-CSAC, and so the YouTube connection will now be broken.
Thank you for your leadership.
Yeah, I double down on that. Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah.